Well, welcome back. Hope you all got a quick break, got to check some emails, got your stickers on the map. I see from even a distance it's starting to fill up, which is pretty exciting. If you're not tall enough to reach your home county, which I am not, go find somebody over 6 feet who can reach up and get your spot up there in northeastern or northwestern Indiana. All right, we have a really exciting afternoon. As if our morning and our lunch wasn't exciting enough, we have some other really great discussions and presentations for you. And it is a real pleasure for me to introduce another great friend and a colleague. I think many of you know that my primary place of occupation is at Ice Miller. I serve as the Director of Agribusiness Strategies for the firm and have been there for over 10 years now. And it has been a great pleasure to be able to work with such an innovative organization, a very strategic and a very thoughtful organization that really thinks about the importance of being engaged in organizations like AgriNovus and allowing me the freedom and the flexibility to be a part of that. And so not only is AgriNovus great and glad to partner with Ice Miller on a number of things, but Ice Miller is generously a sponsor of many of the things that we work on. And so I'd like to introduce the chair of our food and agribusiness practice at Ice Miller, our office managing partner for our Indianapolis office, Melissa Proffitt, to come up and introduce our next session speaker. She really has been very thoughtful and very strategic, very intentional about our work at the firm and about our commitment to the ag and the ag innovation space. And so I think she will be a great person to come up and introduce the next couple of sessions for you. So, Melissa? And you get music too.
I get special music, Beth said. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Beth, as always, thank you for your leadership, not only at Ice Miller, but with AgriNovus and everything that you do. I can remember very well the first time that I heard our next speaker speak. I was at the opening luncheon for the National FFA Convention in Indianapolis several years ago. And it was sort of like the Jerry Maguire movie, You Had Me at Hello. It was the first time that I'd ever heard Jeff Simmons speak, and it was the first time that I was ever at an FFA convention before. And it was overwhelming in every single respect. And I'm honored to be able to introduce Jeff today, and I'm also honored to indicate I am now on the sponsors board of the FFA, so hello to my Blue Jackets down front. Jeff's comments many years ago were words of inspiration and a vision. They offered a challenge to all of us, regardless of age or experience, to do more and to engage more. Jeff Simmons is the president of Elanco Animal Health, and he is a senior vice president at Eli Lilly. He is clearly an innovator, leading one of the most innovative Agbiosciences companies in the world. And he never, ever lets an opportunity go by to champion or not champion innovation in food and agriculture. He reminds us constantly just how critical technology will be in solving the biggest challenges facing us. However, what is needed most in order to solve these challenges is courageous leadership and creative partnerships from a diverse group of people, including individuals within and outside of the agricultural world. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Simmons.
All right, thank you very much. Hey, I just want to say to start, when you think about this organization and what's happened at AgriNovus and the leadership and from the formation of this group and what we have today and what is in front of us, a real credit, and a credit to Ice Miller as well. But to the team, Beth and Melissa and many others, I think just an opportunity to say, hey, to all of you, well done. Super job. Thank you very much. First class. So, I'll start with, I'm a farm boy from upstate New York and still send money there on a regular basis, and I've told my wife for 30 years it will someday turn into something. But 3 decades I've been in central Indiana with Elanco, and our company's been here almost 7 decades. And we're part of a parent company that's been here for 14 decades, just celebrating recently our 140th anniversary. And I will say the vision of saying, hey, can Indiana be the hub of AgriSciences, to where convergence of science, relationship, collaborations, and ultimately we're going to affect three things. We're going to affect lives on the human health side and people. We're going to affect food directly or indirectly, and we're going to affect the environment. Can this be the place? I absolutely believe, with the history of what I've seen, and I'll give a minute why I think we have a competitive advantage here, and I don't want to compare myself to Silicon Valley or Boston or London. I think we can do that. I think, though, ultimately, can we do this in 5 to 7 years? Why not? The real question, I think, will be this. When we're 7 years out and it's happened, I think we're going to come back and point to, I don't know if it's 100, 150, or 200 courageous leaders. And so today, my goal is to provoke a little bit of thought and ideas. I'm not trying to get you to agree to me. I'm not going to go heavy in the content. I'll let the panel after me do that. But we have too many of these kind of meetings, and without provoking thought and some action, then they're a waste of time. Communication's never been harder. I'm a father of 6 kids, and some teenagers especially. So let me start with a quick little story here, because this thing has changed our life, right? So I'm dealing with an attention span of about 10 seconds right now or less. And today's definitely teenagers, okay? So quick story. Upstate New York, it's very common in the dairy industry where I'm from. About February, you pack up, you go to Florida real quick. And you spend a weekend to get out of there. Milking cows gets very difficult and challenging. So a dairy farmer and his wife, they decide, hey, let's go to Florida for the weekend. So they decide to do that, and on Thursday night, the wife says to the husband, hey, I'm not going to be able to join you until Saturday morning. You go ahead, I'll catch up with you. I've got to stay here. So he flies down, checks into the hotel, remembers she just changed her iPhone, tried to remember her number, and he texts her. The text goes to the wrong person. It goes to a widow's wife in Maine of a pastor that just died a couple days before. They just got back. And she reads this text from this dairy farmer in Florida. She screams, falls down. The family runs in after the funeral there at the house, and picks the phone up, and this is what it says. Dearest wife, just checked in. Miss you already. I look forward to your arrival tomorrow. P.S. Sure is hot down here. Communication has never been more challenging today. My goal is I'm not going to get the right message to the right individuals today, but my challenge is I want to provoke some thought. And that's ultimately what I'd like to do. So let me go. I'm going to go kind of quickly here, and I really think it's a good entree to the great panel that's coming behind me. But kind of 3 things. I want to talk about the biggest, our reality. I think there's one reality that's going to touch us all here that I think we can turn this reality into opportunity. The other is reinvention. We need to reinvent ourselves, our companies, and I think this needs to be an epicenter of reinvention here in Central Indiana. And lastly is I want to give you a little bit of what's our recipe from current state to future state and the parallels, I think, to all of you. Now, I'll start by saying, I think science is the answer. I grew up and went to Cornell, and hey, science was validated over time with research, and it became fact. It became foundation. It was not questioned. And it's been amazing. If there's one thing in my era of almost 30 years in animal health, it has gone from that to today. I think we have a credibility crisis. This is the reality. And I think candidly, as you look at this, I kind of ask myself, when did we lose our trust in science? We live in a post-truth world where we seek our social media echoes to kind of reinforce our beliefs. We can even do it if we believe in science sometimes. And these alternative facts, Facebook, fake news, whatever you want to call it, suddenly becomes truth. In agriculture, this is a big deal. Today, we're battling on non-GMO. Glyphosate, right now the debate with our plant folks in Europe is raging. We have a no antibiotic, no hormone, now slow-growing chickens to vaccine-free poultry. And more broadly, we know the anti-vaccination deal on the human side, or whether it's climate change on the plant side. We live in an era today where alternative facts and fake news hold the same weight as peer-reviewed research and recognized experts, where scientists have been replaced by the latest celebrity's opinion. I think this is the reality. I got just a short clip I'll show you that I think puts this in the essence, but I cannot emphasize enough, I am never more optimistic and bullish about we've got the pipelines in plant and animal to feed the world. It's proven. We can feed the world, that's not gonna be a problem, with less environment. The challenge is getting through this reality is gonna be essential, and I think it's an opportunity for us here in Indiana. Here's another perspective on it, if you could play this short video.
How did America rise up from a backwoods country to be one of the greatest nations the world has ever known? We pioneered industries. And all of this required the greatest innovations in science and technology in the world. And so, science is a fundamental part of the country that we are. But in this, the 21st century, when it comes time to make decisions about science, it seems to me people have lost the ability to judge what is true and what is not, what is reliable, what is not reliable, what should you believe, what should you not believe. And when you have people who don't know much about science, standing in denial of it and rising to power, that is a recipe for the complete dismantling of our informed democracy.
Increasing number of parents showing skepticism about vaccinations.
Voters have approved a ban on GMOs.
They call climate change unproven science.
That's not the country I remember growing up in.
So my challenge starting with this is I think it's the reality and I think it's the opportunity. And it's a premise, I think, from a lot of our starting points today. And I think it also is the division between the optimists in agriculture today and those that are concerned. And so my challenge as I move forward here is, you know, there's lots of statistics. I won't waste my time. This is a recent Pew Research study. We've got a confused consumer because of this. And consumers' food's never been more personal, but the consumer confidence has never been lower than it is today. I start with reinvention. Why? I think it's critical to really start by looking in the mirror and asking ourselves, hey, the average food CEO today is 3.5 years. And we can go down the list, but my challenge is I think we need to be reinventing ourselves about every 3 to 5 years. We start with ourselves, then our companies, and then I would argue to say this state and this opportunity here. I got sent something recently earlier in the year saying, hey, you know when you're operating slower than your environment, complacency kicks in, and there is a high need for reinvention. I've kind of added to this list that was sent to me, but I think you can run down through there and say, hey, when we're worried more about political correctness or perceptions than chasing the bold idea that we're after. If you're not having a routinely restless day once in a while because you're worried about being behind or the competition or the next idea, then maybe you're becoming, as I say at the bottom of this slide, someone said, hey, Jeff, don't become the oldest in the room. It has nothing to do with age. Some of maybe the more older mentors I have in age are some of the youngest in terms of perception and in terms of beliefs and in terms of the vision of the future. No one around you is challenging you or stretching you, or the one that I get challenged the most in a meeting room is, Jeff, don't believe you know how this story is going to end. Because maybe it's a different story or we got to turn it on its head. I think reinvention is critical. And there's a lot of people that say, hey, it's important to have margin. It's important to have a little time. I think one on here in terms of personal wise that I've seen that's critical, this next generation needs to know why we're doing what we're doing. There's no industry that I believe is more attractive. We're going to bring 40 new recruits in from 25 land-grant universities this year. And I will tell you, the first question they're asking is, why do you do what you do? Purpose matters. People won't follow you without purpose. And I think the other one is we've moved away from, in our space, the biggest change in Elanco is no longer can you be a generalist. in 100 countries doing 100 different things. We got 6 therapeutic areas we're focused on only. As short as 5 years ago, that was over 2 dozen. You got to determine what you can be best at. I think when you move to our industry, the challenge is we got to be careful. Or I can say industry, or I can say the space that you're in. What we see in animal protein is one, when we get people that have the most influence in our industry, they have to become the most politically correct. And the boldness of their ideas and the platform of their influence decreases. The second is we're very siloed. A good example, we brought 65 CEOs together in Washington last year on meat, milk, and eggs. The largest brands in meat, milk, and eggs globally. 65 companies represented over half of the meat, milk, and egg industrialized industry globally. And just before the program started, the CEO of the largest dairy company and the CEO of the largest chicken company in the US, I introduced them. 2 of the biggest brands, and they're probably in your refrigerator, 4 states away from one another. I think this collaboration and this convergence that was talked about this morning can be an opportunity because industry-wise, it doesn't happen naturally. And then I think lastly is just anti-innovation. We got to turn this around. I'm going to talk about an Indiana brand that is Coca-Cola's latest billion-dollar brand in food. And the essence here is how do we turn it from being a differentiator on a negative side to how do we turn it into something positive? And there are people starting to do that. That's, I think, how we reinvent our industry. And then I think as we look at the state, you all have been talking about the positives. I don't need to probably dwell a lot on those other than to say, I have never seen a time where the environment of the culture was just mentioned about earlier, why people come and stay. They're hard sometimes to get them to recruit here. Once they get here, the culture of humility, the culture of collaboration, the culture of, hey, the environment that we're around, the agriculture we're around, it attracts. Located in Greenfield, I'll tell you, people love apartments on Mass Ave, bedroom locations in Fishers, to a farm in Newcastle. We can out-recruit the coasts of Boston and San Diego on a regular basis, but what gets them to stay is the culture. Even if they move to a university or to Dow Agro or whatever, it is the culture. And I think we should make sure of that. Now, to make that culture go to the next, the reinvention is on the other side. I think we got a little bit of a challenge on the importance of diversity and inclusion. 9 out of 10 vets are female, and their needs are very different than the center of our company today. A lot of people are asking, hey, when are you going to become a gender-neutral company? Same females as males in the company. And will you be inclusive in your culture? Or edgier, faster, more adaptive? How do we turn the positive economics of Indiana even to the next level of incentives, capital structures, et cetera? I think these are things that we need to keep doing to reinvent. I think this is the best place to create reinvention in AgroBiosciences than any other place. Now you go now I end here with recipe, just a couple comments here to kind of say, so what are we doing? How are we turning this into action and what are the parallels? First is, what's the lens you look at in your space? And I think this is when I sit down with a lot of leaders and partners and research partners, manufacturing, or even customers, it's very interesting to say, what's the lens you're looking at? Here's our lens right now in the food animal space. There's 4 things. One is protein, we believe, is the #1 segment. You may have heard me 7 years ago, I was talking about hunger. Today we aren't talking about that, we're talking about One Health. We believe there's no one food segment that will have a greater impact, even over pharmaceuticals, than animal protein. Meat, milk, and egg. The first 1,000 days of a child, the cognitive skills, lots of data to say that. The center of your life, the obesity epidemic, animal protein can be one of the greatest solutions. The aging population of bone development, muscle mass, there's data there. Oh yeah, and there is the 800 million that don't have access to it. There is a conclusion that we had, those 65 CEOs, there's no one food segment that can have a greater impact on human health than animal protein. Food, and that's why it's growing as fast now in the first world as the second world. All you need to do is go into a bookstore and look at the cookbooks and the animal protein emergence. Food's never been more personal. Your refrigerator represents your brand. How do you turn that positively? You can see that Indiana brand I'll come to in just a minute inside that refrigerator. And the 2 things when we survey the young people coming in, or even consumer groups, the 2 hottest topics we got to turn into tailwinds, not headwinds, is animal welfare. The well-being of animals matters more than ever, and the environment. We got to turn those even into our label claims to our products. And lastly is just, how do we turn the consumer skepticism and the confusion, which is at an all-time high in terms of confusion, skepticism, and confidence at a low, how do we turn that positive? And there's some examples today with companies that have done that. A chicken company called Sanderson in Mississippi has done that here recently. So that's our lens. So here's our 3 catalysts. Here's our recipe. And Elanco, and I would say even a lot of animal health and protein companies are doing this, is 1, the platform of One Health, how we talk about innovation, and how we influence. Very quickly on these. On One Health, it's just putting the animal at the table. We've many times stayed in our own silos, and I would say when we fight an antibiotic crisis in 2001 in Europe, it was all about the science, and it was all about just animal production. Today, when we're in Washington talking about antibiotics, I spoke at a hearing at the HHS, at the Human Health Department, in a hearing where we were not at the USDA. It's raising and elevating the discussion to say healthy animals connect to healthy people and healthy environment. It changes your entire stakeholder base and your influence base. How does that look? Well, this is a letter that came out of that summit in Washington, D.C. And this letter and a video and 2 speakers were invited the same exact day we were having this meeting. All 160 heads of countries were at the United Nations talking about antibiotic resistance. And we had a voice in that room by talking about what our commitment was to antibiotics. I think in addition to that, you saw, added credibility, we broadened connections, and we also changed how we talk. And so let me give you an example of this. You've all seen during the politics the Milzansky file where you start at 50. We took the middle. We surveyed a whole bunch of consumers. And we changed the way we talked. Instead of animal production to One Health. What's One Health sound like? In less than a minute soundbite, if we could play this. Listen to the reaction. Above 50 is positive. Above 80 is very unusual. I hope it works, because I'm not sure I could recite it. One more try, and then we'll... So the essence of what he says, and you can see where the dial goes, and you can see the average is over 80. It's 87. This is the typical consumer. And the essence of what he says is he changes about the conversation and doesn't talk as much about efficiency and healthy animals. He talked a lot about the power of a healthy animal and its impact on safe food and on the environment. And the response was way above anything that they've seen in food consumer reporting, especially on production agriculture. So how we change our ability to talk not just to our customers but to consumers is key. On innovation, these are 3 points we talk a lot about when we talk about innovation, whether in Washington or in a boardroom of a major retailer. It's 1, let's be careful we don't get ahead of the science. A food label claim of a GMO-free yogurt, let's be careful. Can we really do that in a healthy animal, sustainable way? Is that possible? Today, marketing VPs of protein companies are making claims before the science is actually there. We might be able to get there with science, but let's not do it ahead of time. The other is we're saying more protein, but today, the majority of that protein is coming just from more animals. Every time we take a technology out, there's a need to add more animals. And then lastly is just the opportunity cost. If we can't make innovation affordable and predictable in our space, it goes somewhere else. And this is just an example I'll do very quickly here, is just the more animal piece is you can see green comes from productivity and blue comes from more animals, and over 80% of the more protein today is coming from more animals. And 2 of our major species are going backwards in productivity globally, beef and eggs. And if you don't win the innovation battle, well, where does it go? Well, 4 of our largest protein customers have bought alternative protein, non-animal protein companies. That's 1. The other is alternative countries. When we lose an innovation here, I will tell you US versus Brazil. Brazil is winning the acceptance and adaptability of innovation in animal protein over the US. And lastly is we do have to use trade-offs. We have business models. And if the osteoarthritis in a dog is a better NPV than the dairy model, that's another factor. So making sure this becomes predictable and sustainable is critical. How we look at innovation. And lastly, I'll conclude here quickly is just, this is where it gets a little provocative, is how do we influence the food chain? Can we influence the food chain? And our answer is we believe we can. But let's be very careful to hear, hey, this is what the consumer wants. Because ultimately, we may be leading our customer versus listening to our customer to what they want. And our data would show that. And this is just quickly, I'll end here by saying, hey, what the consumer wants is we've used headlines in the past when really media mentions what's going on in this meeting is probably more what's happening in the social media. Not aided questions like, do you really want antibiotics in your chicken versus is it what's important to you when you buy meat? And then lastly is really looking at purchase data as well and the importance of that versus a call line or a complaint line. So this is critical to really look at what the consumer wants. And this just shows you the pendulum. We believe we're at a tipping point right now to where this has gone to a point where the sustainability and the life of a antibiotic-free or a GMO-free claim is having less of an impact. It's not bringing the economics. Today there is a glut of cage-free eggs or antibiotic-free chicken. So the intention of marketing to create a differentiation is at a point where the ones circled in red, our customers are saying, we're not sure this is sustainable. GMO-free protein is probably the most emerging, quickest change that we're seeing today. And you see the label fatigue. And this is just the best example, as I'll end on, is raised without antibiotic poultry. Today we've got about 50% of the US poultry industry that has moved to antibiotic-free. We've seen the premiums drop by more than a half and mortality's up for the first time in recorded history. The really interesting point, though, is not only do you need more broilers now, but the use of human-used antibiotics as they pulled all antibiotics, animal-only antibiotics out, has actually increased significantly, an unintended consequence from this. So not what consumers asked for, but it's what we've done from a marketing perspective. So we've reached our time. I'll just highlight, because I mentioned it, Coca-Cola's next billion-dollar brand is just up the road here with Fairlife. They've taken a very positive approach, more protein, more calcium. They filtered the milk. It's 50% more. This is a billion-dollar brand. This brand last year grew. This is a positive label. This grew more than all of organic milk from all labels and all plant milk together. So turning innovation into a positive, the new no is yes, is what Fairlife and what Select has done. So I conclude by saying, hey, the reality is science, and we've got to take science, I believe, the AgriNovus and what we're doing here. How do we make this, with courageous leadership, candidly, an opportunity? And I think it starts with reinvention in ourselves on a regular basis and making this a culture of reinvention and having a recipe to move us from a state of confusion to opportunity. So thank you for the time. I look forward to the panel discussion next. Thank you.